So it's not explicitly about the city as such, but it's about kind of different or alternative processes of urban formation, if I could put it like that. And the first practice will show a kind of research project they did for the Israeli settlements in West Bank, and it is kind of located in a kind of imaginary context of kind of the abandonment of the settlements and what could happen to the structures, to the physical structures there. And the second is about a project which was developed actually as part of an educational agenda at the Berlage Institute, and it's about the urbanization of the Nile Valley in Egypt. I'll just let them present, and hopefully after with that occasion we can bring back some of the issues we discussed earlier in the afternoon.
We start with presenting this research project, which is called Manual of Decolonization. And as Marina said, this project, the condition of the project are within a frame of a sort of future case scenario, which is not still real, in the sense that the condition is that the Israeli, which now occupies part of the West Bank with their settlement, withdraw from that place and let the building structure that they built during those years, I mean, starting with from the 60s until nowadays, back to the Palestinian population. But the premises of this work are grounded on a real concrete event that happened in Gaza in 2005, where the Israeli retreated from that place, from the Gaza Strip. And what happened there was a sort of, as you can see in this image, which is a picture taken during those days, what happened there is that the Israeli army, when let the land back to the Palestinians, they destroyed everything because there wasn't any kind of common and shared idea of what to do with the built structure that they let on the place. And this, of course, not just because they didn't come to any kind of agreement of what to do with these kind of structures, but also because Palestinians didn't want to use those houses, because they are mainly civil settlements or residential compounds. They didn't want to use those structures as they were, because of course these kind of settlements embodies all sort of values and bad values against which Palestinians feel they kind of national and hate against the Israeli. So our work is a sort of work which tries to build a new scenarios for a sort of for the transformation of the settlements in the form of some strategies. We took a case study settlement which is called Psagot, and it is the top of a hill near Ramallah, which is a big Palestinian refugee camp. And this is a more close map of the area. Maybe you already know it, but the particular spatial arrangement of all the Palestinian territory of the West Bank is that it is organized according to a sort of different enclave, territorial enclave, in which the Palestinian ownership of the land is completely fragmented by the Israeli settlements, which are spread within the land, and they are always built close to a Palestinian refugee camp or to a Palestinian village in order to control them and to fragment the fluidity of their territory. So this map clearly represents this sort of spotted landscape that we have on this piece of land.
And yeah, not only the settlements, but also the infrastructures,
Yeah.
they contribute to fragment the continuity of the Palestinian space and environment. So it's really difficult for them to move from one point to the other.
Because you have to imagine the Israeli presence on that territory, like the spots, which are the settlements, connected by these really heavy infrastructures, which are the bypass roads. And so all this Israeli presence form a sort of net within which, a sort of mesh within which the Palestinian villages are encapsulated, how to say. This is a picture of the, below you can see the Israeli settlements of Psagot, which is on the top of the hill, while in the valley, so in the top part of the image, you can see the refugee camp of Ramallah. Yeah, there is there are many common elements within all the Israeli settlements, which are basically the fact that all the settlements are built on the top of the hills, and this because of two main reasons. One, because according to the Arab law, all the hills which are not fertile, so not suitable for agricultural use, were considered historically public lands, and so in this sense they were not owned by anyone except of the state, so they were public lands. And in this sense, when the Israeli occupied those lands, they used this kind of law to take the land for themselves. And the other thing is that from the hill, the Israeli can control, of course, visually control and materially control what happened in the valley. The other fact that the hills, which are not agriculturally used, is not a problem for the Israeli, because all the settlements are just residential settlements. They are not productive cities at all, because all the people living there just live there, and then during the day they go through this bypass road, through the infrastructure, to the coastline cities where they work. So this is a map showing this mechanism of division, in which all the black spots are the Israeli settlements, and each one of them is visually controlling a correspondent Palestinian village. What we did at first was the base, the base is intending to set the methodological framework for what we did as analysis and as a design process. So we take the area of the settlements. In this image you can see the settlement as it is now, so built by the Israeli, all the this kind of design of the urban ground as one of the typical suburban design, with little private houses and some streets that connects them. And then we found this map of the 50s, in which this is a map of the same area, and where it is represented the original Palestinian division of the land. So what we did is to superimpose the old Palestinian map, which is the one that you can see in blue here, over the actual Israeli division of the land. And through this, we cut the land, and we obtained this catalog of parcels, which are just these ones, and we catalog all of them. So they were 23. So we described them, and we listed in an index all the material characteristics of them, like built volume, built area, and so. And then we built a catalog of all the houses of the settlements. So this is the Israeli typologies houses, which are all, there are thousands of Israeli built structures in the West Bank, but they all can be reduced to really few typologies, which are even simpler, we can say that they are all single-family houses of really few different typologies. And here we cataloged all the houses that in this process of the parceling, what we call the operation that we did as first, some of the houses remain cut, and so we cataloged also all this kind of strange remains of building that we obtained from this operation. So I said that this first step is a methodological, because then we based and we settled all our strategies of transformation of these buildings within one of these parcels. So we didn't decide to make like ordinary urban planning project of all the settlements, but we just took one of the parcels and apply on that one particular strategy. And this because I mean, our aim was not to propose a single project for that settlement, but to build a catalog, so an open source and on progress manual of possible transformation, which for their generic approach could be also transferred to other kind of settlements within the West Bank, but also even more widely to different kind of urban settlements, urban scenarios, which can share similar characteristics and similar features to those of this suburban environment. This is the second strategy that we did. Is we called it ungrounding, which is basically to erase the first 10 centimeters of the ground, which in this kind of suburban environment really is one of the strongest elements that design the layout of the settlements. Because here on the first 10 centimeters you have all the roads, all the parkings, all the fences that divides all the single lots of the houses. And this kind of design, when you see, for example, from pictures from above, from the aerial photograph of the area, this spot of the settlements for the design are completely different from what is the surroundings, so the natural landscape of Palestine, or even the built areas of within the West Bank. So this is a sort of proposal of how this operation could be done by a sort of regular plantation of trees, of local trees that destroy in many years destroy all the ground of within the houses. Then here is the first of the real strategies that we proposed, which what we should say maybe before is that each of these strategies we did up to now we did 9 strategies. They are all counter strategies in the sense that they all take one element of the Israeli colonization. So in this case, for example, the container, which is really the one of the first step of the building of a new colony. And for each of these strategies of colonization, we tried to deactivate it and to build a strategy of decolonization. So to use the same element that the Israeli used for the colonization of the land and reuse it for another purpose.
Maybe this work is called Manual of Decolonization, and as Marco said, somehow is a counter manual, and is a counter manual to a specific manual, which is a manual that the Israeli government published in 1994, and which, let's say, explained really carefully in detail how and with which strategies all these settlements should have been constructed. So all the suffix you find in the strategies, it's re, an, it's like denotes how the strategy relates to this precise manual the government produced.
So in each of the strategies, we tried to explain how the colonization method work. So in this case, how when the Israeli decide to build a new colony on the top of a hill, they start with putting there a radio antenna, and then they put there a container, and then this is the starting of the urbanization can begin, and time after time with the container, then when a container is there for a little while, they substitute it with a house, and so the colony can start. So we propose to use the containers, the containers are the first element of the urbanization, but then they always remain on the border of the colonies, because they are, when the colony grows, then so the center of the colony begins to be built in a concrete way, so with the houses, but the containers move down on the hill, and they have this function of how to say, welcome the people that want, Israeli people that want to go into the colony. So they live in the container for a little while, let's say for 6 months, and then when they are accepted by the community, they can build their own house. So the container always remains in the colony, even if the settlement begins to be wide and big. So we took the containers, and what we did is to use them according to different geometries and possible arrangement to densify the urban fabric of the colony. Because all the strategies follow basically two kind of goals, which these goals are intended to resolve two main problems of the Palestinian population, which is the lack of the houses. So all our strategies tend to densify the urban structure of the Israeli settlements, and then the other one to create public places for them, because now, as they are now, as Israeli settlements, they are just residential houses or dormitories. And what we want to create is public space. So in this sense, we just densified the structure. Here is another strategy which deals with the border of the colony, so the border of the settlements, which are the main device which divide the colony from the Palestinian built area. And this borderline is very wide and is very complex, because it has all these devices for controlling the flow of people through it, and it is really a sort of no man's land which keep the settlements separate from the rest of the world. In the sense, when we think about the future in which this border is deactivated, what happens is that the normal and the ordinary urbanization of the Palestinian villages invade the colony. And in this sense, in this strategy, the previous house, so the previous Israeli house, are surrounded by the Palestinian urbanization. They become void, so public space in the same shape as the public space is intended in the normal Palestinian kind of urban structure. So, for example, we try to design different kind of possible uses, market, gardens, and public plazas. This one, maybe now I go a little bit quicker. This one is a real index of all the typology that we found on that colony. And what we propose is to connect them to form wider spaces usable as public or collective functions. So these are short explanation of how to manually build this kind of connection between the houses. And so according to the different envelopes that cover the structures, the mid-structure between the houses, these spaces can be suitable for different uses, different programs like greenhouses, nurseries, or schools, or civic centers. This one is another which deals with the typical use of the roof that you have in the Palestinian villages, which is totally different from the Western one, because of course in Western, for example, of course in the West Bank, the rain precipitation is low, so you don't need a tilted roof. While the Israeli settlements, all of them, they have red, very tilted roof, and this for two main reasons, not for weather necessities, but just for sort of ideological characterization of the houses, because they want to be different from the Palestinian ones, which have flat roofs. And also for a military reason, because when the Israeli army flies with helicopters over the land, they immediately can recognize the red spots of the settlements from the rest of the built structures. So in this strategy, we suggest to substitute the tilted roof with flat ones, and which is not just because of aesthetical reasons, but because the roof in the Palestinian use of the city is a sort of second layer of public movement, because they have roads, of course, streets, but they also use in most of the cases the roofs and the terraces of the houses as a sort of alternative way for moving through the city. So they are both really hybrid spaces, half private, half public. Yeah, that's it. No, we didn't investigate this kind of situation because we consider these parcels just as sort of a virtual index of the strategies. So, for example, in a real situation, so in the case that these strategies would be applied to a settlement, of course, you could have the case in which on a single house, maybe 2 or 3 of the strategies can be applied together. For example, the anoming one or the container. I don't know. But in this case, so even the kind of possible combination that you can have is really free, and we didn't want to design all these possible combinations. I mean, just to let them free. Because also we didn't want to focus on that particular settlements except for the goal of using it as a sort of real index, sort of virtual index of our strategies.
And there's also another reason. So what we produced is a manual, and a manual as a product has a quite specific language and characteristics. That means that its goal is to be understood and usable for the widest public possible. So the idea is that usually a manual, its visual part, often it's more relevant than the written one. And to make it the clearest, the more understandable possible, all the content is reduced to the smallest quantity of information, so that there's not a possibility to make confusion, let's say. So it's like a way to be the clearest possible. That means also that in some case you maybe you try to be redundant or to banalize, but it's it's a a precise choice to
or not to foresee any possible. In the sense, your question is really interesting because it is how to say, a fertile drift for the research to try to design all the different type of combination within the strategies. But we worked a lot on the language of the manual, so because one of the main aim that we have is to bypass the normal process of production of architecture, which passes through profession to certain type of knowledge, which is conserved by architects or by urban planners or by politicians and so on. So with the tool of the manual, we want to bypass all this to arrive directly to the population, because one of the main points is that if you speak with the people there, they don't even imagine how they could transform this kind of settlements. So in this sense, the drawings, the aim of the drawing is to make them conscious of a possible of the environment, of a sort of future environment in which they could live. Because of course what they would like to do would erase everything, so make a tabula rasa and start again. But this is, of course, on one hand, you can understand it, and on the other hand, it's totally stupid because you have a sort of a compound, a really big amount of this structure that can be reused. Systematizing everything, sorry?
Everything what they list, like you are providing for everything what the Palestinian community requires. I see a little bit of a contradiction with that because, in a way, the contradiction of gaining this territory, you are resolving it as a magician almost. So, what space do you leave for them to really appropriate and see this contradiction within the origin of the project?
No, I didn't get, sorry.
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of, you are giving a manual with all the aspects that should be addressed to have a Palestinian community. Point by point, Palestinian community should have this and that and that. Perhaps I'm already simplifying.
Yeah, I think it is not imposing a sort of a particular view of the future, a possible future built environment, in the sense that it is not imposing everything, it's just suggesting possible way of transforming the structure. But they are really, also, we maintain them really low defined, in the sense that we didn't, the work is done on an architectural scale, but it's really generic. So the approach is really, it is not designed with any kind of particular shape or form or architectural language, just really, really generic. So in the sense, it is very capable of being enriched by the material construction.
Okay, good evening. What I will present is a research I developed together with Oliver Till as studio coordinator at the Berlage Institute last semester. I don't think I will explain in detail all what we did because it's going to be too long. I will just maybe list the points, the presupposition or the conclusion that I think are more arguable, because I think this is a topic that raises certain questions. The first one is this. Is Nile City a city? Nile City, what we called, in a lack of better terms, Nile City is a strip of land that is 900 kilometers long, goes from Aswan in the south of Egypt to Cairo in the north. It's 900 kilometers long. It's more or less, let's say, in average, is 10, 15 kilometers wide. It is on the two sides of the Nile River, and it borders desert. These urban environment has a population of 26 million inhabitants. That makes a density of more than 2,000 inhabitants per square kilometer. That is more than any European city. Nevertheless, this is not a city. It's not a city in the sense that it doesn't have any city character. So it's 900 kilometers without a movie theater, just to give you an idea. So it's village after village after village. And it's an environment that grew in a way that is completely different from European city or even Asian contemporary megacities that are based on movement. So people move to the city in order to have a new job, start a new life. So they are, to be very brutal, based on time, so to a change in time. So they are modern in the most, let's say, basic, I would say even Hegelian sense of the word. So they are there because of certain history. The Nile City is not like that. So of course the Nile City is there. It's possible because of certain progress, of certain industrial progress in pharmaceutical industry that allowed to, let's say, get rid of problem of certain kind of sickness. So now, let's say, the population grew in the last 50 years in incredible way, but this doesn't mean any change in the structure of this thing. It's just bigger village, bigger village, bigger village, without any change of hierarchy of this system. Now, the second thing is that the Nile City is part of the Nile Valley. Here we use Nile City as, let's say, this urban system. That's not really a city, but we don't have a better word. Nile Valley I use as a term to describe a landscape. So not the entire valley of the Nile River, not the geographical valley, because we were never busy with anything south of Aswan Dam. Nile River is, I think, if I remember correctly, around 6,000 kilometers long. It starts in Ethiopia, if I'm not wrong, and so in the region of the Great Lakes. What we call Nile Valley is this precise condition that that the Nile produces in Egypt, and it's not a purely natural situation. Of course, there is the Nile running into the desert and producing a fertile region, a fertile strip. But this fertile strip is entirely artificial. And it is entirely artificial, and this landscape has been defined by mankind since something like 6,000 years. The way in which this landscape has been defined in ancient Egypt is still there. Particularly still there, I think. There might have been, it has been very difficult to reconstruct this thing, but there might have been a moment during the British Protectorate in which probably a certain industrialization of agriculture took place, particularly when, because of American Civil War, Egypt had to produce cotton for Manchester factories, and there was a change in the structure of agricultural property. But after Nasser land reformation, let's say we are back to the parcel situation that probably was the one of ancient Egypt. A contemporary Egyptian farmer living in the Upper Valley usually has a property of 3 feddan, that means a football field and a half. On this football field and a half, he can grow 3 crops in a year, so that's helping a bit. But usually he has a family of around 10 people to, let's say, to feed with this football field and a half. This situation produces an environment that is, on one side, entirely artificial, because it's completely abstract, geometric, and man-made. On the other side, it produces a landscape that is extremely rough. So it is like, it's artificial, but it's not precise. It's like the Netherlands as made in the Neolithic age. And this produces the incredible beauty of this landscape. The Nile city, and the Nile Valley, have these conditions that have been established 6,000 years ago and are unbelievably beautiful. And they are, at the same time, unbelievably boring. It's always the same crops. It's always wheat, sugar cane, corn, and the only tree is date tree, the palm date. There's a few oranges. That's nothing else. We tried to describe this landscape, and one of the most interesting critical tools that we discovered to understand, to compare this landscape to are Atari video games of the early 80s. I don't know if you have an idea of that, but it has the same thing. So it is completely artificial, but it's not precise, it's raw. And the other thing is that, like Egypt, it's entirely flat. And it's working only on the level of graphic design. This is another thing that, that was valid for ancient Egypt. And I think ancient Egyptians were simply overwhelmed by the fact that they learned to write, and everything they did was writing. So there's only a single kind of ancient Egyptian art that is graphic design, that is applied to every level. So architecture is not architecture, it's graphic design. Sculpture is not really sculpture, it's graphic design. Everything is always flat. Pyramids, for instance, are just icons placed in a flat landscape. So it's like considering the entire country as a page and writing on top of this page. And if you consider ancient Egyptian architecture, particularly the temple architecture, you see that it's really organized like Atari video games. So if you consider a standard temple, it is made of a series of different courtyards that are always organized in a way that the subject, the viewer, can just look straight to a wall in front of him and move left or right, but not turn. And you pass through a series of different courtyards. Like in Atari video games, you have different screens, I think they were called. So the second one. And the architecture of the second one is exactly the same as the architecture of the first one. The only difference is that the enemy is just a bit faster. So an Egyptian temple is always the same. It's always you enter, there's a wall in front of you, you have to read this wall. And the difference is just that the more you progress, the more it is difficult. Let's say it's the less people can enter into this room. To the last rooms where only the higher priest could enter. All of these that might, let's say, seem relatively uninteresting compared to what's happening in contemporary Egypt, is, on the contrary, really important, because this landscape is still there, and the landscape has been for us the only starting point to imagine a future for this city. Because in Egypt you are in a condition that you cannot really make economical prediction, you cannot really imagine the tendency toward immigration of the population. It's very difficult to imagine the development of Egyptian politics, because Mubarak, who is 83, if I'm not wrong, still one of the general who did the coup d'etat in the 50s, and nobody knows what's going to happen after. So we decided not to start from any, again, not from time, not from change, but from space, from what remains. And space received a very precise interpretation that is still there. And by the way, I think it's interesting that this interpretation of space and of landscape that is so precisely written into this landscape survived, even if the civilization that now lives in Egypt since more than 1,000 years, so the Arabs, was not really involved in the production of that. Somehow this is this landscape resists as an ancient Egyptian thing that survived the Greek and Roman and Arabic invasion, and survived the Arab socialism, survived everything. It's still there. Now, the problem is that if we think of ancient Egypt, it had a population of 7 million inhabitants, at least according to Diodorus Siculus. Contemporary Egypt has a population of 80 million that mainly live in the Delta and in Cairo, but still there are 26 million living in the Upper Valley. And this makes the system completely unsustainable. Unsustainable because, to reduce it to very brute facts, there's simply more and more people surviving with less and less land. And of course, more people means more building into the valley means less land to be cultivated into the valley. Then this story is a bit oversimplifying, because it's not really necessary the land, it's just necessary the water, because it's possible to turn whatever land into fertile land if you have water. But still, the older land of the valley is better than the new reclaimed land into the desert. This is the situation. Here, for instance, you see a map of the entire valley made as a metro map, and you see that the facilities that are offered by these cities that are roughly under 20 kilometers from each other are always the same. There's a hospital, there are certain administrative buildings, there's maybe university, but there's no difference in between these cities. This map is scary because it looks like a crystalline diagram of a linear, let's say, urban configuration, and it tells everything. So there's nothing more than this diagram there. It's, and even the fact that it is so regular, that you really have a city every 120 kilometers. It means that it is entirely the same thing, and that these little provincial capital, the capitals of the governorate, are just providing a certain set of services, but they do not have any character of their own. And this strip is entirely homogeneous, and at a certain moment it ends up in Cairo. This means that whatever farmer has basically just two possibilities that are to go from a village to another village that is like the one in which he lives, or to go to one of these governorate capitals that are, well, if you need to go to the hospital, for instance, or if you want to go to the city, you just go to Cairo. Whatever slightly metropolitan is available in Egypt is in Cairo. And usually, for instance, if somebody lives in the governorate of Soag, usually they never went to Asyut, that is the capital of the next governorate. They just went either to Soag or to another village or to Cairo. You can go on. What else? Now, another thing that we decided was to try to describe this area in different ways. So, trying to reproduce the quality of this landscape through the Atari landscape that you saw at the beginning, and then to redraw this model in order to try to distill some devices that might be, let's say, employed either in other places. So what we tried to do was to make it as abstract as possible in order to get rid of any, how to say, good feelings in a way, or any, let's say, emotional involvement with the poverty, and this to try to be very detached and at the same time very precise in analyzing a model and trying to understand how this model operates and see even the potential, see the beauty as much as possible. Here you see what I was describing before about the way in which this diagram is pretty brutal, I think, but it gives an idea of how this, let's call it, city developed so far. This attempt at redrawing was part of an idea of, let's say, recognizing the potential and formalizing what was there. That was basically then even the main aim of the design. Let's say you will see even that the proposal, it's very simple. It doesn't change that much. It just says to how to operate with a very, very limited amount of means and what to insert. And it's not challenging the existing city, not challenging the existing social structure beyond a certain level. So this means that, for instance, that I think it's one of the, I think it has been the argument of a big debate with the students. For instance, it's how much you can propose a change for this condition, and we decided to reduce our ambition as much as possible. So, for instance, there's been an ongoing debate with the students about public space. So, as soon as they started to design public space. And I always say, forget about public space. There's no need for this type of European public space into these places. And public space is in the basement where there is the shop, and there is where public life happens. And we should not impose a cultural model that is not there. But at the same time, I think we cannot even say that, let's say, the mode, the kind of social life that is happening inside of that type of villages is particularly appreciable. It's particularly it's not something I would defend so much. So the problem was to try to be precise, to repeat as much as possible what was already there, but at the same time to add a bit of a possible alternative. The most limited as possible, but still something that could contain the possibility of another system of growth for these type of cities. Here you see, then we came to a classification based on the landscape, based on the different strips. We simply, given that the 900-kilometer strip is all the same, we cut a little sample and we divided according to the different region, because there is a series of, let's say, rules, like the strips are the desert, the border in between desert and a valley, the river, and so on, mirror on the other side. And of course, there are certain things that can happen only into the desert, because they are big, they are state intervention, the desert is property of the state, and so on. Then there are smaller things that can happen in this buffer zone in between, and then other things that happen inside of the valley. And of course, there are different, how to say, responsible for intervention in these different strips. Like, for instance, the state operates into the desert because it's easy, it's not necessary to deal with the population. That's one of the problems. It's a highly centralized country. There is not an efficient bureaucracy. There's not a bureaucracy that is able to talk with the population. And so the government try as much as possible to avoid any discussion. So what they are doing is to apply a very, how to say, Fordist approach to planning in Egypt. Like, population is growing, we should not build on the agricultural land, so let's build on the desert, make new cities in the desert. And the Egyptian government made in the last 30 years something like 40 brand new cities in the desert. That started as a socialist, let's say, enterprise, turned into gated community, very successful gated community around Cairo at a certain moment, and then went on with more or less success even into the valley. But this is a quite complicated story. I will not go into it, but it is clear that the government tries to solve problems without really taking care of any possible contact with the population. So, for instance, governmental buildings are always fenced, and this, by the way, waste a lot of space, a lot of, let's say, soil that might be cultivated, and these things are simply placed there, and there's a fence around, and they don't want to establish any relation with the informal growth of this city. So what we tried to do was to bridge a bit this gap, imagine how to make more formal the kind of processes that are nevertheless happening, and to imagine this process in the most simple way. So defining a set of tools that was very limited. Basically, it's a binary, let's say, alphabet made of two types of building, private building and public building. Private building is exactly like this thing, like this, and it accepts everything. So concrete structure, the limit of, let's say, the dimensional limit of that type of technology, that is no more than 10, 15 floors, brick walls, no elevators, everything accepted, just a bit refined in order to contain certain tools, certain tools that are necessary for these, let's say, for life in this kind of metropolis. Here you see this attempt at producing an abstraction of this landscape. So to try to recognize this character and to try to distill a certain beauty out of it that might, in a way, be used even elsewhere. I think in a certain way, it might sound cynical to say like that, but I think it is not, if we are honest with it. I think the students and myself as well, when going to Egypt, we were not really going to solve Egyptian problems. We were going to do what I think is the contemporary version of a grand tour. Clancy went to Sicily, and we go to Egypt or Colombia or whatever, and we go to learn, I think. And this doesn't mean that we cannot contribute to more reasonable urban policies there, but our scope, it's basically not that. The money that is used to pay our trip there is money from European or American schools or cultural institutions that want something for the students to be reapplied basically in Europe and in America. Then it might be a tool to establish a communication, but it's not only that. I think I'm more or less, I said everything I wanted to say, I guess. Now you will see the proposal that is basically made of these two type of buildings that are based on the existing one and that are trying to organize all growth inside of the valley along the major roads, and to imagine a different type of settlement at the border with the desert, with more space, so where space is not an issue. So the houses on the border of the desert are low-rise and patio houses, basically. And we try to imagine a more productive and experimental cooperative agriculture at the borders of the Nile, of the desert. This because it's easy to imagine a progress for Egyptian agriculture if you simply get rid of the structure of property. But to get rid of that structure of property, that is a structure of property that produced this situation, that a field is more or less 5 times, 10 times big as a tractor, so it absolutely makes no sense to use a tractor to cultivate that plot of land. So agriculture is incredibly underdeveloped from a technological point of view, but probably it's not that the problem. So it's not, and it doesn't make sense to imagine a transformation that is just put together all parcels and grow something with contemporary, or not even contemporary, but a bit old technology. But what makes sense is to imagine new kind of crops and maybe new type of infrastructure to sell these crops out of Egypt. Because Egyptian land is extremely productive and could be used to produce expensive crops like vegetables, I don't know. But at the moment this is not happening, because on the one side the traditional farming is based on wheat, and the old farmers do not want to depend for their diet on anybody else, because the Egyptian diet is based on wheat. And this produces this strange situation that one of the most productive land in the world is used for one of the most simple kind of crop. You can easily grow wheat in Minnesota or Ukraine, and you should not do that in Egypt. But the problem is that there's no infrastructure to bring tomato from the upper valley to Europe. The second thing is that the products of Egyptian agriculture are highly polluted, because Egyptian farmers use far too many fertilizer and far too many pesticides. And on the other side, of course, European Union, that could be, let's say, one of the main markets, is not only taking care of food security for its citizen, but even protecting European farmers growing tomatoes in, I don't know, southern Italy. This condition of the upper valley that seems incredibly local is in reality the product of very global condition. But still, we try to imagine how it could be possible to experiment with new kind of crops, and how these new experiments that are located basically at the border with the desert could, if successful, be copied by single farmers inside of the valley. Here you see a more detailed model of these towers in the end. This is a scenario of how it could look like. We didn't define, let's say, an optimum in our proposal. Let's say our proposal is very simple. Given that population is going to grow, let's try to figure out a way to build this huge amount of built matter that's going to happen there. But we do not define whether it's going to be 1, 2, 3, or 4. So there's not an optimum level. The city will grow. We just define a strategy for the growth of this city that aims at protecting as much as possible the cultivable land inside of the valley. And not only for purely productive or environmental reason, but even because we think that it's extremely beautiful, this landscape. And this is probably the last thing I want to say, that there's not really a perception in Egypt at the moment of the beauty of that landscape. And this is probably one of the first thing in the first steps in a possible process of transformation, to start to recognize a certain beauty in order to imagine a certain project. I think it's all.
Border with the desert.
It's there.
Because
You walk for a while, it's fields, and at a certain moment it's desert. It's not so clear cut because, for instance, there are reclamation activity happening there, and this reclamation activity might be either formal by the government or informal, because basically it's like this. If it's desert, it's state-owned, but if it's cultivated, should be owned by somebody. So if you start to cultivate a piece of desert, and if you're particularly poor, you can do it. You get the water from the sewers, and you bring a bit of mud there. You need to have mud, but you can go to the Lake Nasser and get the mud. The only problem are crocodiles, but and no, it's not so funny because people die because of this, because they're if it's a state reclamation project, you go with bulldozers and so on, and you get the mud. But if you do it illegally, you're stealing the mud of the state, and there are state-employed crocodiles who are protecting the mud of the state. And every year there's more or less 30, 50 persons who die because of this thing. But let's say that you got the mud. You bring the mud to these fields, you bring some water, you start certain cycle of crops that is, in the end, not particularly complicated. You just need to have a layer of around 20 centimeters mud. And after 3-4 years, you can start to cultivate. It's not really as productive as the older land, but provided you have water, it's okay. At that point, you go to the administration, you say, well, you know, that's my land because it's cultivated and nobody else is the owner. So who's the owner? I'm the owner. And this is a way in which this border slowly moves. So the border is not so clear-cut, but still this is a buffer zone of 100, 200 meters. So it's pretty clear where it is desert and where it is agricultural soil. Yeah.
Most of what you've described is economic analysis and large-scale planning issues, and then you've come to your own specifically architectural sort of a project. And I liked your phrase to sort of start to recognize a certain beauty and also imagine a certain project. However, it kind of leaves out the question of who else is working on the large-scale economic projects. There must be many agencies, and they must have their own ideas about what is to be done. For instance, some of them might be stressing, first of all, the need for better transport infrastructure, and so therefore, in terms of building opportunity, then maybe that's the target. So how did you relate to the other agencies that are really the professional, you know, geophysical agencies that and economic agencies that are there?
Oh, well, of course, there's plenty of expertises that could, let's say, should be involved in such a project. I think the first thing is if you consider the political level, because if we want to face the discussion, I think we should involve even the political level. At the moment, if you consider the decisions of the central Egyptian government, the Upper Valley is almost entirely forgotten. The investment and the money, Egyptian economy is booming, let's say. It grows. I think in the last year was one of the countries that grew the most in the world, something like 7% per year. This growth happens in the Delta and in Cairo, because in the Delta and in Cairo there are industrial facilities and so on, and from the Delta and from Cairo it's possible to export to Europe. This means that the Upper Valley is almost entirely forgotten. It's seen really as a problem, and agriculture is really not part of the project for the future that the contemporary Egyptian elite is thinking about. On the contrary, if we consider agriculture in more general terms, for sure agriculture is one of the most profitable business of the next years. It's not by chance that large investment funds or large corporations start to simply buy land in Africa in the last 5 years. And I think the commodity that increased the most in value in the last 5 years is land. And this is, I think, based on a very brutal calculation. There will be more and more people to feed, and the amount of land that is available is that one. So let's buy the land. I think in agriculture there's a lot of potential, and it might be one of the crucial, let's say, element of a project of development for countries such as Egypt. But this is not what the Egyptian leaders are thinking. In a way, I think they are still related to more old-fashioned models of development. That is, I think, one of the basic problems of underdeveloped or developing, if we want to be polite, countries, that they do not see the opportunities because they have a certain cultural, how to say, they are not updated and they don't see the next business, so they cannot do this business on their own, and somebody else is doing this business. Going back to the, let's say, infrastructural and different expertise issue, I definitely think planning should involve this kind of thing. But of course, I'm doing this thing as an architect. The only thing I can say as an architect is that planning is gonna be crucial in the future. Of course, we are gonna call it landscape urbanism because otherwise not fancy. But it is planning, and I think if we want to seriously face all these environmental issues, we need to consider again planning, considering a bigger scale, considering from the global point of view. I would really put it in the most brutal Marxist way, to see the problems. I think we can face environmental issues only if we see problems from the point of view of totality. And to see problems from the point of view of totality is the definition of what is the crucial point of Marxism according to Lukács. I think it's Geschichte and Klassbewusstsein, history and class consciousness, I don't know. And Lukács really sees the center point of Marxism not in historical materialism, class struggle, but in seeing processes from the point of view of totality. And this is what is really critical to, I think, capitalism and so on.
Try to think totality, the big picture, the biggest picture. One could imagine saying then that there's an implication, therefore, of a dirigist approach, where, for instance, your mud fields are not done by a peasant over a couple of hundred, over a couple of acres. The government simply transfers large-scale agriculture to the desert, and then leaves the river strip to a kind of agro-tourism.
I'm sorry, I didn't get.
Well, I mean, you know, a big picture solution.
Yeah.
I mean, what I can't quite figure out is that you talk about totality and you have this very big graphic deduction, which is very convincing. But then your solution is one that is in the hands of the absolutely individual landholder.
Yeah, because I think Egypt already. Yeah, I think we should imagine a larger picture and then define very basic local means. I think Egypt already tried the large picture approach with Nasser. And I think it was a very interesting thing. So I think it was one of the biggest, how to say, attempt from the Arabic world in the last 50 years. And they tried to solve the problem the industrial, I would even say, Soviet way. Let's do the big dam, solve all the problem with the Nile River, and everything is solved. It didn't work. It didn't work because it didn't take care of every single farmer. I think it's much more complicated. It needs much more arguing with case by case, and most of all, it needed much more teaching. And this teaching was not provided because nobody from the Egyptian elite wanted to run the risk of giving the possibility to Egyptian farmers to study, to learn, and then finally to express their own ideas. The problem of Egypt, if we want to go to this, is that a policeman gets, I think, 5 times income than a policeman gets 5 times as much as a school teacher, and it's pretty clear in what you invest your money. It's, I think, 10% of the population is employed by either police, and luckily there is a peace agreement with Israel that says that Egypt cannot have more than, I think, 300,000 soldiers. Otherwise they would be, I don't know, 25% of the population employed either in the army, the police, the whatsoever, guards. So just to make an example, there's very good infrastructure, so there's this highway in the desert, and could be very fast to move through Egypt, but it's not, because at every governorate, so every 150 kilometers, there's a police spot, and they destroyed the highway with the I don't know, the thing you need to break the asphalt, and in order to make a police post there. And you spend for every governorate like half an hour there, and could be very fast to move, but it's not. And it's not an infrastructural problem.
No, I just wanted, I had something else to say, but I just wanted to kind of pick up on the conversation you were having, and that, you know, I'd kind of applaud your approach to understand the totality, and kind of underline, as I understand it, it's important not to think of the totality as the same as totalitarianism or a totalizing approach, and that the two should be distinguished, really. But then that brings me to the question of planning and landscape urbanism, as you say, we might otherwise call it. But I would kind of suggest it would be it would still be worth identifying largely. Planning, the objection to planning comes from the fact that it's often associated either with the kind of totalizing approach of, you know, totalitarian regimes, or with, you know, with Keynesianism, with a kind of welfare state approach. So what you're actually doing in your approach, which I like, seems to be much more about offering a tactic, if you like, that can be adopted.
Yeah.
And so it is different from conventional planning, whether you want to call it counter planning or whatever.
Yes.
But then my kind of question for the other presenters was, when at the start of your presentation you were talking about infrastructure and the major role that plays in dividing the land and kind of parceling it. And I wondered, you know, given that there's much writing now about infrastructure as a kind of political or military weapon from people like Stephen Graham and Simon Marvin and others, did you at any point feel you needed to address that, as that would be a kind of remnant too in any kind of change of occupation from Israeli to Palestinian, and how you might
we
address
didn't
that?
take into account the infrastructure. We just worked on the architecture, and that because you were saying before that also in this NILE, the NILE city research, there's a sort of dualism in the sense that there is a first wide perspective, so a large-scale approach to the territory, and then without almost any kind of mid-passage, you have the detail, architectural detail. In this sense, our work is similar, because we try to explain with a large-scale reasoning on how the territory on the West Bank works, so the infrastructure, the spot settlements, and then how architecture really in detail works according to this regional and wide-scale arrangement of the territory. But we just focused on the architectural scale, because in the sense, I mean, our aim to build a manual also wanted to face the problem of go directly to address directly the population. So because if you're the owner of a house, you can imagine how you can, with your hands, transform it and build it differently, while you can attack on the infrastructure, because the infrastructure is not your own.
And I kind of appreciate what you're doing at that level, but then it still seems to me like a kind of partial.
Yeah.
Yes, but
response. And I'm not going to criticise.
Yeah, of course.
Try and encompass everything.
Yeah.
I'm just kind of underlining the point that infrastructure
Yeah.
remains
and
kind of tactical.
Yeah,
in its
sure.
own right.
yeah, that's for sure. But it's also like phase 2, because the infrastructure is not useful anymore as soon the colonies are abandoned. Otherwise, I mean, it's like the fact that you can exploit the infrastructure is because the colonies are not anymore working. I mean, the infrastructures are not anymore connecting the colonies to the main land of Israel.
Right.
So, if you don't imagine that, I mean, actually the infrastructures are really, there's a strict surveillance by the government, and so it's like quite far more complicated to imagine that at that small scale intervention.
And so I think it can be the phase 2, because the houses are really highly symbolizes the Israeli presence in the territory, and they embodies the hate of the Palestinians again, because they're really symbolical structure, they are intimate structure, because the people live in there. Well, infrastructure, of course, they are also symbols of occupation, but they are less connected to this kind of political and emotive
And yet, one of the things, I don't know the details of how these infrastructures work, I think like as well as you do, but one of the things more generally about infrastructures is that they tend to transcend political and geographic borders, and that's why Russia can exert power on some of its neighbours just by sweating the pipeline, you know. So you have this, you have a local scale, you have a much larger scale as well.
Yeah.
But it seems to me that we try to provide an alternative to the planning, and on the one, it seems that you used a quite localized architectural response to that idea of totality, by creating that kind of typology or the manual or the catalog, which is kind of extracted from particular typologies there on site. So how you reconcile this kind of scope and scale and totality within which you place all your analysis, and this highly localized kind of architectural response to it? There are these two levels, but it's as
Paradoxically, when Marco and 3 of our group, they went to the States where we had an exhibition of this work, and they told me that some people from US said, yeah, it's a suburban area, but if you think about like San Diego, for example, which is a city which grew up on the military industry, somehow you can even detach from the political issue of Palestine and Israel, but still you can try to modify the physical built materials of the suburban areas. And also, they were really work on a specific colony, but as I said before, the government published this manual in 1984, so it's something you can really generalize then. So the quality of these areas allows you to jump from the two scales.
Also because we found that really detailed really peculiar details of the architecture of the houses. So, for example, the stone cladding of the houses, which is because they have to be similar to the one in Jerusalem, or the tilted roof, or the fact that all the houses are disposed on the top of the hill on circle streets, so from the top descending down. So these really detailed features of the architecture are so because they have to answer to really wide territorial scale issues and constrictions. So in the sense there is sort of really this gap between the architectural detail and the territorial scale.
I don't know, maybe my answer is more general. I don't see it as a problem. Let's say the fact that there is this gap in between, let's say, certain reading of a certain context, that it's even a political reading and so on, and then the fact that you work as an architect, so you, usually then in Europe you are even busy with things that are even much smaller than that, and you just decide what's the distance in between walls and what's the distance in between ceiling and the pavement, and I think it's part of architecture. And I think if architecture has a cultural value, I think it's because in a certain way it works as an example. So every time you make a design, you set up a set of decisions and the system or certain logic that you show, and maybe making a small apartment, but in principle it's a logic that it can be expanded. So I think architecture is intimately an example. I think it's the only reason for the cultural value of architecture is that it's so abstract that every time a design works as a model for other possible designs. So I think without these, I think so it's a really boring job, but without these, I think would be unbelievably uninteresting. The fact that strangely, because I don't really know how, but the way in which you position columns might refer to the way in which you would, in case, propose to a larger community to organize whatsoever, makes the cultural value of what we are sometimes doing, I think.
I think it's one of the most interesting challenges, because in the morning we had a discussion of the type, and I think perhaps if one starts locating that discussion within that zone between the total or global and the highly localized, perhaps it becomes much more interesting and more instrumental.
Yeah.
So it's not like a problem that as a gap, as a void.
Yeah, I personally like this gap, and I even like the fact that you are confronted with specific circumstances, and these specific circumstances provide a certain friction. They resist, and they are not what you expect before. There's some kind of opposition from the context, and that's interesting.